Okay, well, so we've got people from, I'm in Australia, Belfast, Bogota, Santander de Quilichao, and Arizona, USA. So we've got, oh, Timor, East Timor, if he's here. And we've got Rigoberta in Guatemala. So we've got a good spread. Right, John, shall I ring up Albenis?
¿Me escuchan perfectamente? Buenos días desde Colombia.
Good morning from Colombia.
Perfecto, te escuchamos.
Listo. Entonces,
We're listening.
vamos a iniciar. Maya misa guanyin pute buchalin ya marab govelan mo igual pishin de la tsegujin ravi goteyo. Chu te buchan yuna muy ombo gata piamba gata shlata linja ashi goven linja chuve. Namui Mosimera, Namui Musimera y Munjiu, Unguanguachinja. Muy buenos días a todos y todas. Un saludo.
Good morning, everyone. Special greetings, spiritual greetings, and a brotherhood greetings to all of you, the ones who are seeing us and listening to these communication means in this national at world level. I want to send you my greetings as a Misa peoples and on behalf of those indigenous people and the Afro peoples. We will start this scenario, international scenario, requesting international support to safeguard the peace agreement, other challenges of the ending chapter. Again, thanking this transmission through 3 platforms, one of the Ethnic Commission, the second through our good organization, Indigenous Organization from Colombia, OMIC, and through the ESN. We are in 3 languages, Spanish, English, and French. To those who are in the social networks, you can help us with hashtag #FuerzaM. Then we will read out the agenda. First, greetings. Second, harmonization. For us, the ethnic peoples, is very important to open and to deliver and offer the guide and the path to our higher spirits. The third point, the context and synthesis and how this ethnic commission for peace was born under the Defense of Human Rights. And then we will have our host that will start tissuing or waving with our special guest, our sister Armando. Then after that, in this international sense, we will have different celebrities that will be with us. We will give the floor to others that are listening and to our authorities, indigenous authorities and Afro authorities, for their recommendations, conclusions, challenges to improve facing the implementation of the peace agreement of the chapter end. Then we will be singing a special song. The song, The Pain of Our Forebears, we will be with Ana Milenaria, and we will be closing with Majores and Jora. This is the agenda to introduce to you the people who are in this virtual table and all the people who are following us through these social networks. Please be reminded that we are on hashtag #FuerzaIn. Then we continue with our harmonization with our sister Albenis from the Pijao people.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Currently, our sister Albenis Tique is lighting the candle to lighten our spirits, energies through this scenario and to deliver this good legacy of our forebears Afro and indigenous peoples within this international weaving.
Gracias, hermana.
Thank you, Sister Albenis Tique from the Pijao people. We could see it is a ritual of cosmic ancestor indigenous energies to open this path, this tissue with the international support to safeguard the implementation of the peace agreement and other challenges in the 5 years of the end chapter. Next, I will be summarizing how is that this ethnic commission came up for peace and the defense of territorial rights. It is an ethnic instance of authorities, indigenous authorities and Afro authorities safeguarding the territorial rights of our ethnic peoples within the negotiation process and implementation of the peace agreement. Apart from it, and within this scenario, we require some special mechanism different to the participation so that they can tell the realities that we found as ethnic peoples. This ethnic commission for peace and territorial rights, it is a natural autonomous instance with participation and decision that is working and recognizes the state and the territorial processes. As I said at the beginning, it is authorities, indigenous authorities, and Afro authorities scenario, reivindicating our own identity, rights, autonomy, and political participation, as well as territorial participation, exercising a peace building from our realities and from our territories. Apart from this commission takes on board as a principle the complementarity between men and women, reivindicating the main multicultural features and the diversity of ethnic peoples within the autonomous resolution of conflicts between peoples, communities, indigenous. This commission joins all organizations, national, indigenous, Colombian organizations, so the National Peace Council, Afro-Colombian Peace Council, COMBA, the community, the Black Community Process, DCN, indigenous authorities of the west of Colombia, Audastan, ethnic peoples for peace. It is a commission that has been created from the struggles of our mayors and mayoresses of our indigenous and Afro communities. So, this is the ethnic commission for all here with us, the ones who are seeing and listening to us in all scenarios. Please be remembered that we have hashtag Fuerza Étnica. Next, we will give our greetings to our authorities, Mayor Armando Valbuena, Mayor Carlos Rosero, Mayor Andrew Plaza, and Mayoress Joana Bustos. We start with Mayor Armando Valbuena. I believe that Mayor Armando Valbuena is not present, so while this is happening, we can just continue with Mayor Carlos Rosero. Please accept my greetings on behalf of Mayor Armando. Because of difficult circumstances, cannot be with us physically, but he is with us spiritually. Thank you. Thank you. Now we move to Mayor Carlos Rosero. Good morning, everyone. our colleagues that made this conversation possible, and the ones who have accepted to take part with us in this ethnic commission, so important. Just to give you a greeting and to tell you that on behalf of the peoples that we are grateful for your voices and the hope that we have in Colombia to broaden our circumstances in which our peoples have been attacked not only through the armed internal conflict, but the logic and models of development, risking the lives of our peoples, their territories, and also the peoples of our colleagues, helping in this task, not only the task of the indigenous and Afro peoples, but it's a humanity task. Peace is everybody's concern. And to keep the planet for future generations is not only an issue of individual thoughts. Thank you for this nice message. Next, we go to Mayor. Good morning. Special greetings to all people taking part in this virtual scenario. It is nice to know that at national level, as well as international level, we see many people interested in the peace in Colombia. But it's also important to know that within this peace process, there is a special space for ethnic peoples. That piece is related to the ethnic chapter peace agreed in Havana as part of the final peace agreement subscribed on the 11th of November 2016. Let's say that 5 years ago, once this agreement was signed, ethnic peoples, we are a big behind in the implementation of this subscribed agreement. It is important then that all of us, the personalities with us today, we can listen to them with ideas, suggestions to get this agreement ahead, the implementation framework of this peace agreement that will be in favor of ethnic peoples. It's not easy, has not been easy in these higher instances of peace. We are doing this kind of balance of what so far is the implementation. And believe me, that is complex, because while the government says that the ethnic peace chapter has 8% of implementation, we in this ethnic peace higher instance been working on this, and we have the idea and the results not even reaching the 10%. There is a imbalance in which from the 80, their 80 and our 10. So we're about to publish a report that we have consolidated. It will give us an idea of how is the government not giving the world or the country real data. We will be attentive in this meeting. Thank you for your participation, the ones with us, and a bit ahead, if it is possible, we will have an intervention. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor Asdrúbal Plaza, for this that this meeting reflect the work that we've been doing, the work we're doing for a long time, men and women within this territorial process, building spaces, allowing to live in peace within the communities, their rights, and to have some harmonic spaces with nature and territories. From a women, Afro-Indigenous women point of view, we want this meeting to allow us to strengthen this alliance, working alliance, international working alliance, allowing us to with a very important meeting with all of you and advance in the implementation of peace from the focus of gender, women, family, and thanking you. We are building, and this is the idea, facing this invitation, this meeting that will allow us to weave this alliance for the good of our territories in Colombia. Thank you. Thank you, Joanna Millán Bustos, who's given our word as an authority. Next, we will link at international level with, I give the floor to my colleague and sister, Amanda Hurtado. She is an activist, academician from the Discrimination Social Conservatory. Thank you. Please be reminded that we are hashtag Fuerza Étnica and through the different social networks. Please, Amanda, go ahead. Good morning. Good evening to those with us and from different countries. We will give the floor to this panel. The panel has as its main objective to within these international allies supporting the implementation of these peace agreements, specifically to the ethnic chapter, which are the safeguarding instances, protecting, guaranteeing the rights of the ethnic peoples in Colombia. This panel is comprehensive part of some academicians, activists, and people have bet for a negotiated outcome from the armed conflict. It is also part. We have the representative of the United Nations in Colombia. So I'll give the floor for them to introduce themselves or the ones who are going to be part of the panel. We have Noam Chomsky, who is a linguist, philosopher, and politologist activist from the United States. He is an emerita professor of linguistics of the MIT, Massachusetts Institute, and is one of the highlighted features of the 20th century. And it's important to say that apart from playing an academic role, he is a political activist and has been especially characterized because of his critical work facing the contemporary capitalism and the foreign policies of the United States. He believes himself to be as a social thinker, and even the New York Times has featured him as one of the most important thinkers of the moment. Thank you, Professor Chomsky, for being with us in this space. We also have the participation of Rigoberta Mench, a Central American sister from Guatemala. He is an indigenous and activist woman, member of the Maya group, defender of the human rights, and the goodwill ambassadors from UNESCO, who's won the Peace Nobel Prize in 1992. Thank you very much, Sister Rigoberta, for being with us. In this reflection space, we have José Manuel Ramos Horta. He is the former president of East Timor between 2007 and 2012. He also has been a minister in several instances, specifically of foreign affairs, and also he was a speaker of the Timorese resistance in exile during the Indonesia's occupation between 1975 and 1999. Thank you, José Manuel Ramos, for being with us in this space. We do have Jera Kelly, He is a politician, Republican politician from Ireland. He's a member of the Provisional IRA. He performed a very important role within these negotiation processes that ended in the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, and currently he's a member of the Northern Ireland Assembly. So we have an important composition from different spaces and places supporting us to our own collective reflection that we are doing as a Colombian peoples around the transition of this peace process signed between the Colombian government and the FARC-EP. Also, this peace process had a third actor, as Rodolfo Adán Vega, in which the ethnic peoples occupied an important role, and it became a three-actors peace process. The government, the FARC, and the ethnic peoples are the third party in this negotiation. And we have Juan Carlos Monges with us as well, who has been the coordinator of the mission created by the Human Rights Council of the United Nations to research the assault of the community, the humanitarian people going to Gaza. He's been in charge of the Higher Commissioner of the United Nations in Guatemala. He has been a political advisor to the mission in Guatemala, peace mission, and he is currently the joint representative of the Higher Commission of the United Nations for Colombia. Thank you very much for your company, which is very important to listen to your recommendations and perspectives of the United Nations from the one who has been accompanying and verifying the compliance of the ethnic chapter of the peace agreement, also accompanying the ethnic peoples in the management of the rights. So this is the perspective to start with this dialogue. I'd like to start with Professor Chomsky. He could perhaps accompany this reflection. Colombia, after the signing of the peace agreement, we have utopia, we have hope to walk to a negotiated exit from the conflict. 5 years later, we have a number of leaders assassinated because of their management of the implementation and other rights in Colombia, specifically a link to land and the guarantees to be able to remain in the bare forest territories. It has been a deepening of our humanitarian crisis in the country. Many communities have been displaced, confined, and the current pandemic, COVID-19, exacerbated these war policies within the country, taking us to a degradation of war, even in racial policies, as is being reflected within the most affected population in terms of COVID, which are the population of indigenous peoples and this poverty. This perspective, I believe it is important that Professor Chomsky could perhaps give us some reflections taking into account the international community with us and how is that effectively these current humanitarian crises are faced by the indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities is reaching a peak because of the lack of implementation of this peace agreement. Under this specific perspective, last year when we were meeting with Professor Chomsky, he certainly reflected about the possibility of this gathering of elements of the lack of implementation of the peace agreement, the lack of political will of the current government to break this peace agreement, were important aspects that could be unleashing a wave of protest in a country as Colombia. And within that perspective, Professor Chomsky, how is that we could speak of the implementation of the peace agreement, especially of this ethnic chapter of the peace agreement, and how these elements, current elements within the national context in Colombia and the international context have an incidence upon the implementation of the peace chapter, especially because of the current crisis of capitalism in its neoliberal phase. Professor Chomsky, you have the floor.
Shall I begin? Yes.
Yes, Professor.
I've been asked a few comments on the question of capitalism and the climate crisis, the deepening crisis of accumulation, the role of the ethnic framework. It's been dramatic in connection with these issues. We began with the release of the latest report of the IPCC, the mission that monitors the state of the climate under the UN's auspices of the United Nations, several hundred countries involved. It is the most authoritative study possible. It was a very dire study. It made it very clear that the world is, they say with certainty, moving to a level of 1.5 degrees Celsius above industrial levels. The Paris negotiations in 2015 set that as the peak beyond which we are going into a dangerous area. So we're certain to reach that in 10 or 12 years, no matter what we do, because of the amount of carbon accumulation that's already been. Then on to further hazards, apocalyptic outcomes, unless the use of fossil fuel is reduced to essentially zero mid-century. And then they added something over and above the ominous forecasts of earlier years, now made more extreme, pointed out the point necessary to deploy technologies to remove carbon from the atmosphere if we hope to stabilize the temperature, to move on to what's sometimes called a hothouse Earth of 3 to 4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, which is essentially uninhabitable. Problem is that those technologies do not exist. They're barely in the early stages of development. And even if they come into existence, how to deploy them is not at all clear. It's not impossible, but it's certainly not going to be achieved within the framework of current state capitalist institutions. This is left to the private sector. For one thing, there'll be scattered and inadequate efforts. For another, we can be confident that this will lead to essentially a greenwashing, pretenses of doing something which offer a pretext, an excuse for continuing to fossil fuels for profit making. Well, that was Monday. The next day, Tuesday, President Joe Biden made an appeal to the oil-producing countries, OPEC. He appealed to them to increase the fossil fuels. That would improve the US economic prospects based on increased consumption and destruction of resources. Well, that's the way the week opened. Some dramatic insight into the relation between capitalism and climate change. They are on a collision course. It's not hard. We can essentially say goodbye within a not long period ahead. Sea level rise 1 or more meters, maybe more. Most of the world will become uninhabitable. There'll be massive flight of people beyond any dreams of migration. There's no escape. People years ago thought we'll go to Canada, which is a cold place, except that Canada is burning so much so that even the fire can't be contained western. So we'll go to Siberia, except that Siberia temperatures have reached levels vastly beyond what they ever were, and a danger is appearing, just discovered, that the rising temperatures in Siberia are releasing vast quantities of methane, not from the wetlands or the affected hard rock where it was unexpected, which covered methane is it's not as long lasting as carbon dioxide, but it's much more lethal. It's also produced industrial meat production, cows, and if we are forced to disaster, we know means overcome it. That's important. International Energy has come out with detailed, specific proposals which are feasible, implemented, could contain the crisis, can't overcome it. We've already injured the earth severely, but could contain it. So we could adapt a viable society. The U.S. resolution, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, young representative who came in on the Sanders wave, and Ed Markey, a senior senator from Massachusetts, been working on environmental issues all his life. They introduced approximately that of the International Energy. There are scholar economists come to the same conclusions. See, the fact is that we have means to contain the damage, but we're racing in the opposite. How does Colombia fit into this? Very significantly. Colombia's is fossil fuels. Colombia is one of the meat producers. The Amazon region is a very significant element in the global climate system. It's what's it absorbs carbon from the atmosphere, produces. The Amazon is under severe threat. Brazilian Amazon is literally being destroyed under the Bolsonaro regime, rapidly increasing deforestation, illegal but supported. Point that a group of scientists a couple of weeks that the southeastern portion of the Amazon has already reached a point which anticipated for many decades, a point in which it is shifting. A sink absorbs carbon to a carbon emitter carbon. For Brazil, total disaster. It means the Amazon moved to essentially grasslands. The production of carbon will the taking in of carbon rainfall will drop sharply. Become desert. It's a devastating catastrophe for Brazil, for the entire world. Now, in a situation, period of the extreme violence, the Amazon was left pretty much untouched. Investors didn't want to move in because of the uncertainty. With the very tentative peace agreements, there's the beginnings of greater investment in the Amazon, which will destroy it, gold mining, ranches, anything for profit. Personally, my own latest visit to Cauca, small village, remote, couple of hours away from the Pan American Highway, very poor village. I was there because they were trying desperately to protect the mountain, which is a virgin forest on a mountain, which is their energy resource, their water resource, to protect it from a gold mining company, which was coming in that would devastate and destroy it. They're working hard. They need outside support. Things like that are happening elsewhere. Well, where does the Ethnic Commission come in? Its crucial role, apart from the main goal of trying to protect people from simple assassination and destruction, assassination, murder, increasing everywhere. Apart from this, they must turn to some sort of sustainable development for Colombia so it can play its essential role in overcoming the massive crisis that we have entered into. This goes far back in history, just looking at the recent period, the post-Cold War period. In 1945, the United States was in a position of overwhelming power, basically ruled the world. And it set out consciously, carefully, to lay out the framework for the post-war world. Began in Latin America. In February 1945, before the war even ended, the United States called a hemispheric conference in Mexico. All countries of Latin America attended. The point of the hemispheric conference was to impose what was called an economic charter for the Americas, determination of how the Americas would function as the countries as economic units. And it had a principle. The principle was stated by the State Department, US State Department, clearly. It said there must be an end to economic nationalism in any form. No country is permitted to undertake policies which will interfere in any way with the international economic system that the US is proposing. And the State Department went on to explain that a dangerous current of opinion is developing in Latin America, and it must be stopped. That current opinion is what they called the philosophy of the new nationalism, which holds, I'm quoting, that the first beneficiaries of a country's resources should be the people of that country. That is unacceptable. The first beneficiaries of a country's resources must be international investors, which means essentially US, Canadian multinational corporations, EU corporations in later years. They must be the first beneficiaries. So in the tiny village of Cauca, which I visited, the first beneficiaries of the resources, in this case, the water resources of the virgin forest, cannot be the people of that village. Rather, they must be the gold mining international enterprise that wants to destroy Colombian resources and enrich the rich and the wealthy countries. That's the economic charter for the Americas. There have been struggles against it over the years. United Nations, under Latin American initiatives, did in the 1970s call for a new international economic order that would respond to the needs of the global South. That was crushed. Reagan administration finished it quickly. This struggle continues. It's very much alive today. Now, it's not just the future of the Latin American countries that is at stake. The future of all of humanity is at stake as we race towards a crisis that can be stopped, but only by deeply committed efforts in every corner of the globe, which will reverse and modify, overcome the destructive tendencies that are inherent in an unconstrained capitalism of the kind we have suffered under for 40 years within the neoliberal framework. That's essentially where we stand today.
Ok. Ok, el profesor Chomsky creo que nos lleva a una reflexión.
Professor Chomsky takes us to a very complex reflection, and it's about the planting of analysis within these structural material elements, how to think on climate change and the relation of the economy and dependency of the countries, the regional countries facing the northern countries. Under this perspective, he talks about the possibility of combination of efforts. And in that area, I'd like to ask Professor Chomsky what opportunities you can see in the changing of the government of the United States, and how is that it could help the implementation of the peace agreement, especially in this early chapter, government, Biden's government in this change of policy.
Professor, did you get the question? Professor Chomsky?
Sorry.
Did you get the question in English, Professor?
I'm sorry, I can't hear the question. I hear that the moderator is asking questions, but I did not hear it.
Professor, in the lower part of the screen, there is an interpretation button that you can activate.
The question, Professor, was basically, do you see any reasons for optimism with the new administration in the U.S. with Biden? How could the Ethnic Commission work effectively with him and his new administration? How could hopefully a new government in Colombia after elections start to work with the Biden administration? Do you see any hope there?
And she also asked for specific recommendations related to the implementation of the peace agreement for ethnic communities.
The implementation, I mean, it could be hoped that the international community would take a significant role in assisting the Ethnic Commission in its highly significant, crucial activities. Right now, it doesn't look like it. The Biden administration has taken essentially no position with regard to Colombia, very little with regard to Latin America. In the general area that we're discussing of capitalism and climate change, the Biden administration has indeed put forth programs which are the best yet. They're not good enough, but the best of any country, much better than any previous administration, but they're not really implementing them. I gave one example, calling on OPEC to increase oil production, but the same is true in other areas. Leasing of federal lands for oil exploitation has increased. The focus of the administration is on other topics. It's not on this. Enough agitation, popular activism might move it in that direction. But for the time being, I think the Ethnic Commission is going to be constrained pretty much to act within Colombia without the kind of support that it should have from the international community to protect people from violence and destruction, and to aid Colombia in moving towards a form of sustainable development, which will be highly beneficial to Colombia and will help participate in a global effort, and it must be international, to confront the immense crisis that stands right before us, as the IPCC again emphasized, even in starker terms than before, a few days ago.
Ok, muchísimas gracias, Profesor Chomsky.
Thank you very much, Professor Chomsky. I believe that what you've discussed in terms of the path, the walks, this is a very important work for the Ethnic Commission, and is to keep on in its efforts on the follow-up and accompaniment to the communities, and also to the implementation of the ethnic chapter of the peace agreement. And it's very important, as repeated by Professor Chomsky, to have a change in the economic model, that for another one that can read the climate change and the possibility to build a sustainable development model for the region. Under this perspective, I want to start this conversation and dialogue with José Manuel Ramos Horta. And within that perspective, I'd like to ask him, recognizing his experience in the mediation of these peace agreement and peace processes, what has been working and what has been the strategies and methodologies that you have used if we don't have guarantees or trust for them to comply within the processes. In the case of Colombia, 5 years after the peace agreement signing, as said before, there is a high index of non-compliance from the state in this agreement implementation. Under this perspective, I'd like to listen to your reflection.
To me?
I don't think so. I'm not sure. Ask.
What?
If it's for you, the question. Do you have the?
No, I can't see anything.
A professor has no translation. Does anyone can translate it? Like the last time?
Okay, yes, Professor. I think the question was for you.
José Ramos Horta.
And José Ramos Horta. José Ramos Horta. The question is to José Ramos Horta.
Yes.
About the challenge
Yes.
of the
The
implementation, where
Yes.
when the government is not committed with the implementation as is happening in Colombia.
The question.
Yes.
Yes, so the question is to José Ramos.
Okay. Tenemos un problema
I'm sorry.
con,
The professor is having an issue. José Ramos Horta is out of the call.
Tiene problemas con su internet en este
There
momento.
is an internet problems for him right now. So I am going to change the presentation and I give the floor to Rigoberta Mench. Rigoberta, according to your experience in Central America, I want to ask you, is there any similarity or differences between the peace accord signed in Guatemala and Colombia, and specifically indigenous people and women? Thank you very much for this opportunity. Greeting to all the sisters, brothers, analysts. I admire you, all of you, a lot. Thanks to the militancy for the peace and to be able to achieve that the people respect their dignity. Today is the day of our ancestors. We appreciate our first parents, grandparents, grandmothers, and all their first teachings so we can continue the full life they wish for us, especially to the indigenous people. I always insist that each peace accord has a different context, different particularities, because it is also an intensity in the confrontation, policies, deepness, violent policies used for many decades. Therefore, we shall not see our process alone or like an international global accord. Each one has its own specifics. Guatemala case, for example, we were able to receive the global agreement on indigenous people, where it will be used the international concepts about indigenous people, mainly 169 agreement and the category of people with their own names. And that's the reason why we don't have an ethnical agreement here. If that's so, it would be a loss for the Mayas, Incas, Arifunas, and all the people that have their own language and their specific territory. Our peace accord is very deep, very profound. And my point is that not necessarily a profound accord reflecting the demands of the indigenous people to do a real consultation to those indigenous people is the only way to transform the situation of these people. In Guatemala, the peace accord was a blank check for the governments, for the transnationals. Our master Noam Chomsky says, all the global implications of the international policies Also, a checking blank for the Guatemalan entrepreneurs trying to get rid of one conflict, covering new spaces, new scenarios. Therefore, our first battle was around human rights, and we wanted to recover the historical memory of the victims, to re-articulate the communities, try to heal the fragmentation from this armed conflict, mainly the inter-community, inter-ethnical confrontations. We continue now, maybe in a worse battle, worse than war. And that's why during these 25 years of this peace accord, we are able to see that it continues intact. A set of realities that weren't transformed, no structural changes were done, and some extraordinary events occur. The role of the international community in Guatemala was essential. The creation of the CICIG, International Community Against Impunity. Impunity was going to continue, crime was going to continue, and those with major risk in this peace accord were the human rights defenders. They were gonna be the victims because they are witness and they are demanding for the justice. And really, they were going to pay for the crimes. And therefore, many fields were analyzed deeply. Now, with regards to Colombia, I respect a lot that process. It was larger than ours due to the conflict, deep conflict that this country has gone through. And also the invisibility of the indigenous people, the lack of their recognition to them and their authorities and their ancestors. Here in Guatemala, definitely no one can ignore the presence and the activation, the work, the organization of the ancestral rulers. In Colombia, there was a lot of silence and abandonment. And the international community never come with a strategy that will benefit really the indigenous people. I've been in El Cauca during different times during the peace accord signatures. An aircraft was flying with a peace signal so far. We thought it was never going to land to that specific community. What this means is that the partners of the international community weren't the indigenous people, nor the conflict resolution, territorial conflicts the indigenous people is going through, unless to strengthen the community organizations, the local organization, the regional organization, and most of all, the organization that means to strengthen the leaders. I think Colombia has gone through a very tough moment because there is no policy to strengthen the leadership of the diverse indigenous peoples that coexist there. And they have their own rulers, their own economical organizations, their own political organizations, and territorial organizations. I don't want to discourage you about this, but it is time to speak up the truth. Everyone who mentions about peace accord needs to be very honest and less pleasant. I feel that in order to wanting to cover some peace accords, we tend to forget that peace is a process, is a re-articulation, is a compensation of deep damages caused in the humanism of the environment. If the state is not supporting those people, there is no possible accord that will bring the structural changes. If the private companies don't modify their way of operating, they continue kind of approving this controversy, I'm pretty sure that it's not gonna be possible to understand deeply this peace accord. Here, fragmentation is even worse. During elections, all these people suffer a lot in order to express their ideas, their proposals, and also everything is marginal at the same time. So where do we need to guide the force? I don't want to be anti-system, but we need to recognize the system of each people. And we need to women organize. Here in Guatemala, we are associated in a platform of indigenous women, more than 50 leaders. And we have been fighting year after year with our lives during the last 40 years. And now, together, we try to have an incidence because the other powers are huge. On the one hand, we have the war interest linked with corruption, linked to impunity, to organized crime, and also different traffics. I'm not mean just drug trafficking. Today, we are going back to this human trafficking, contemporary slavery, and we are seeing a daily eviction of these people from their mother nature and their environment. So my recommendation is, first, all the rulers, all the possible rulers will prepare a common strategy with their own balance from their own realities. If I do one from Guatemala, maybe I'm gonna make a mistake because here things are not going good. There is an impunity, organized crime. We're going back to the past. Going back to the past means to validate violence as a method, and it means repression. The state threatens with these curfews and other measures used in the past. Why? Because the norms never change. Again, peace accord is a motivation. I want to tell you, use it. Motivate your fights, your actions, and also motivate your ideas. And you need to socialize the results. I think that all the rulers from that continent can meet together to socialize what we consider our peace achievements. Not of those who received this blank check, but our achievements, who continue working in the social organization. And most of all, let's see the humanitarian emergency landscape in most of the region of the continent where there are indigenous people, Afro-descendant, reivindicating their identity. They live in extreme poverty. They're going through this pandemic with as never before they have, and they are being fragmented. Fragmentation between the state entities that go there, but also the one left by the war, the controversies, and the semantic discussion. Utopia. We are people love utopia, but it's true that transformation is not looking for utopias. They want a commitment of action from learning in what side I am. I am in that one that is pleasing everything, or in the other side of the large majority that is saying that they're not being heard by the governments, nor by the mining companies or transnationals, not being heard by the own local entrepreneurs. So we need to become partners, because if not, what's the peace that we want to build? I appreciate the Colombian people, the peace accord, and I hope that that blank check will be one for the indigenous people, also for the rulers, not only to the same who has always taken over the power structures. Greeting to all the women. Diana, thank you for the invitation. I am very pleased. I am in Guatemala. Let's continue forward. We are here. Let's use the social media. Don't miss, because we are brothers, although we are far. We are in the jungle. Don't use this pandemic as a pretext of silence, as a pretext also of the total abandonment of our elders, our boys and children with malnutrition. Colombia is so wealthy, and it's so sad when I see that there is a lot of malnutrition, children suffering. There is a big clips showing that the peace that we need is a human being and not a paper. Assess the concept, but prepare our own impacts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rigoberta. Before saying goodbye, it would be important to deepen in something, and it's about some elements that you have touched. And that is what happens after the peace process in Guatemala, quite effectively a deepening of interest in the war linked to corruption and organized crime. Under this perspective, you can tell us what were the strategies used to overcome these challenges after the signing of the Guatemalan Peace Agreement. What I remember the most as a model was the role played by the CIFIC, the Commission, International Commission Against Impunity, because it strengthened somehow a prosecution office against corruption and against impunity. Now, for the criminal prosecution against corruption as a crime against the population, stealing the state resources, increasing it in the international sphere. So CICIG, we are defending the challenges left from CICIG is the struggle flag for the human rights defenders, but it's not the state's play role, because it was the state trying to finish and is still trying to finish what has been achieved in our impunity struggle and the struggle against criminals that have been committed against humanity. Also, the historic memory of the peoples. Not only that, the problems that we have within the territories. We have done 70 consultations in the territories, and these results is a challenge for the state to change its policies. But this is not binding to justice. However, this is subjected. The lack of tolerance, whoever is hosting this impunity is very powerful. It is in the Congress, it is in the legal system, and it is in the executive power, in the administration of the state. So we are with this popular struggle, we are with the social struggle. We don't have any other level but the manifestations, demonstrations, asking for the stepping down of the prosecutor's office. the international community, we don't see that as active as it should be, because why is that the international community is not as active? I'd like to see that a community, an active community here in Colombia or whatever, if it is true that the final objective is the state of right, participation, democracy, pacific participation of the citizenship. This is a definition type of movement. I believe that we have lots of achievements. We have very brave women, and you will have us on their own conviction all the years needed, because peace didn't happen 25 years ago. Is that we have to just be surveyed every single day. Thank you. I believe that it is quite key, the role of the international community facing this corruption, this perspective. I believe that there is a challenge, a very important one, for the Ethnic Commission, and is to keep insisting upon this political and social mobilization, as we have done since 500 years ago. Thank you very much, Rigoberta, for being with us. And I believe that is quite key, your role within this weaving process between allies to safeguard the peace agreement in Colombia. Thank you. You can count on me. I am with you. You can call, I go. I don't have boundaries, so please count on me. Thank you. Okay, now we say goodbye now. We say goodbye to Rigoberta, our friend and sister. So we'll give the floor to Jera Kelly. He's in the room. Yes, he is in the room. So I like ask Jera Kelly what has been his inspiration to promote the peace process in 1998 at the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. I'd like to listen to your own reflection, Jera Kelly.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start off by saying I'm very privileged to be asked to say a few words here, and I hope it will be of some benefit, but I'm not sure. Let me agree with Roberta, two comments she made. One is that every conflict and indeed every peace process is different, but there are points which are threads which travel through, which I think are important. And also when she speaks about a common strategy coming together, I think is a very core issue. So if I could give a very brief background, because I work on the basis, and forgive me if I say very obvious things. I don't know very much about Colombia. A very brief background, because I work on the basis, and forgive me. You okay? Can you hear me? I'm getting feedback. Sorry. So a sort of very brief background is that Ireland is Britain's oldest colony. There has been over 800 years of it. To jump very far forward then, there has been conflict, military conflict on an ongoing basis during that period. But in 1921, after a period of conflict, the island was partitioned by the British. And it was partitioned in a way, and I come from the north of Ireland, that it was an arithmetic, a mathematical approach to it, where they cut off a section where they thought that there was enough pro-British in that section to have that in British hands forever. And since then, there has been in each generation some sort of military uprising. So to go to your question, to come much further forward, I was involved in the conflict after the civil rights processes of '69, which was in America and in Europe. We took to the streets, mostly students, and demanded civil rights. And the British brought in the army and attacked it militarily. And that gave birth, if you like, again, a rebirth to the Irish Republican Army. And there was a military conflict then right up till 1994 and then 97, where there was a number of ceasefires. The IRA called the ceasefires on the basis of the promise that there would be negotiations. There was a British government at the time under John Major, which was a minority government, who stalled the implementation, who said, yes, there would be talks. But I was involved from the very start, and it became very clear that the talks were not sincere, probably because they were a minority government and depended on pro-British elements in Ireland to stay in government. When Tony Blair came in Labour, he had a huge majority, and the cessation had broken down for a period of 18 months, but was able to be put back together again, and it broke down because there was no implementation of promises made. And then from the second ceasefire, there were negotiations for a period of 2 years. And out of that came the agreement. And I think Roberta also mentioned trust. So let me say about trust. The reason to have an agreement, the reason for them, and I say some very obvious things, the reason that you need an agreement is because there is clearly mistrust. So trust does not become before an agreement. Trust comes after an agreement. And it is built upon whatever the agreement says, then you do your part of it. And the other players in this, which of course was the British government in our case, have to do their part. And what I can tell you now, because it is 23 years, 22, 23 years after, was what I didn't realize at the time was that we thought the negotiations were up to the agreement and then it would be implementation, that would be it. In actual fact, the negotiations has continued throughout that long period. And I think that's important because, again, listening to Roberta, she talks about 25 years. And the agreement was a bespoke agreement that we came to. It involved three relationships. The relationship within the north of Ireland, which is still under British jurisdiction, and I am a member of that assembly. And then there was the north-south, so we are an all-Ireland party, Sinn Féin. So we have representatives in the Republic of Ireland, which is the south of Ireland. So we had a north-south ministerial council, which meant that we had a relationship for the first time in our history between people elected in the south, ministers, government ministers, and ones elected in the north, which were the other government ministers. I, for a time, was a junior minister. And then the third relationship, and these were all interdependent, was between the island of Ireland and the island of Britain. And that was the British-Irish Council, which involved the Irish government, the government in the north, and the British government. And from that, then, there were a series of issues around, for instance, policing, which was hugely problematic. We were unable to come to an agreement during the negotiations, except to agree that since we could not sort it out within that period, that there would be an international commission that became the Patent Commission, which involved people from America, from Britain, from Ireland, from Australia, from a number of other places, who came back within a period, I think, of a year with a whole transformation, 175 recommendations to change completely the policing situation. And that was very important because the police were made up of over 95% of pro-British people. So they were part of the conflict. They were combatants in the conflict. Now it has, in this period, and I am a member of the policing board, and I was a combatant. I was a member of the Irish Republican Army. Now there is over 30% who are now also Irish in their view, who are Irish nationalists. And I mention that because that was a huge issue to us, which we couldn't agree with at the time, but then agreed. And the 175, I'm giving this as an example of things that you've spoke about yourselves, that you do not change the government immediately you get an agreement. So to be very frank, powerful governments generally come to an agreement to have peace because it allows them to move on with whatever their strategy is. Peace is not in itself a resolution. All the peace is there. So we always argued that it had to be peace with justice, with equality, with human rights, all of that. And all of that was dealt with in the Good Friday Agreement. But an agreement, because it's not a long document, then has to be implemented. And that's, of course, what the conversation today is about. So let me give an example, because human rights have been talked about. We got many things sorted out, and I described the institutions which we set up. The institution in the north then fell on a number of occasions, again to do with the lack of implementation. So it was suspended, for instance, in 2003. It was suspended about 4 times, but the last time was in 2017, and it has just been put back together again recently. And I say this not to depress you, but to give you hope that if you maintain what your goal is, then that is the core of moving ahead. Because at times it looks like it is an impossible. They used to use a thing here during the conflict, which was that the problem was intractable. The British said it a lot, and the British media said it a lot. And we always said it is not intractable if you, instead of looking at a security, and that's what always happened, they were always looking at a security resolution, a military, if you like, resolution, a governmental resolution to it. It is impossible if you then look for a political solution. And a political solution has to bring about equality, has to bring about fairness, it has to bring about all those things. So not only did we go through that agreement, but which called the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, we then had to have another agreement because one of the parties withdrew, which was a unionist party called the Democratic Unionist Party. And they built up an offense against the Good Friday Agreement. But they then came on board when we had a second agreement in the St. Andrews Agreement, which frankly did not move a huge amount away from the Good Friday Agreement, but by bringing everybody in, it allowed us to move the Good Friday Agreement ahead with some small changes. Even in policing, it took up till 2010. It took up to 2006, the St. Andrews Agreement, for ourselves to agree to join the police because they tried to take the 175 recommendations, which were very good recommendations to our surprise. And on each recommendation, they tried to take the core of it out and to return the power. So we have a series of accountability mechanisms, for instance. I'm on the policing board, we have a number of others, which are there to make the police accountable to the population. We went for a critical mass, so instead of having 95 to 97% all from one part of our community, we had to have a critical mass where the 2 big sections of the community, which were the nationalists, the Irish nationalists, and the British, then had to be part of that. So in 2010, we had to have another negotiation which would allow policing powers to be passed, because they still remained within London, to be passed into the north of Ireland, so that we could set up the policing board, so that the parties would be involved and all of that. And that was another negotiation. And then we had a huge issue, and I noticed again, I think it was Roberta talking about this, which was to do with legacy, with the people who had suffered during the conflict on all sides. And what do you do for them, and how do you help them? And we, in 2000, over a long period of time, because the government side generally resists acknowledgement that there was hurt on all sides, that they are inclined to talk about what was legal and what was that, instead of there was a number of combatant forces involved. In any case, we got an agreement called the Stormont House Agreement in 2014, which set up structures to deal with truth commission, prosecutions, reconciliation, and all of that. Now, again, I don't say as to depress anybody, but we are now in the situation, having changed the British government to Boris Johnson, who, if I may say so, is like the small brother of Donald Trump, who is very right wing. And he is now, after making the agreement, he himself also made the agreement, right? And said that in New Decade, New Approach in 2018, they would implement the legacy policies. He is now attempting to bring in what's called a statute of limitations or an amnesty, which would ignore all the victims and just say, so we're going to move on. And I say all that in our circumstance, because it's the only place I have any expertise. I don't have great answers for you, except to say this, that we always had a set of strategic objectives, which, if you like, were a roadmap to a united Ireland. So we haven't achieved the United Ireland yet. But what the Good Friday Agreement was it created an ability which wasn't there before, a political pathway to achieve a united Ireland. And even though I've gone through a series of problems during that period, the fact is that it still remains that we have a political way forward. In other words, that we are not forced because people take up arms because they are forced to take up arms. Communities take up arms, and I mean, I say this, when I was a teenager, which I was, when I first joined the Irish Republican Army, I did not wake up one morning and become violent. I saw injustice and saw no choice, with many others of my generation, and saw no choice to go that. Equally, when the opportunity came for negotiations, because they, of course, are an extension of struggle, and it was very difficult to convince our combatants of this. But Sinn Féin, the political party, which I had joined after coming out of jail, were able to convince, with difficulty, but convince people that there is a political way forward. And that's what moved the whole process on. So the strategic objectives we had, which I think perhaps are common to most struggles and certainly conflict resolution processes, was to popularize the struggle. In other words, if you are right in what you are going for, then you need to convince people that that is true and why it's true and all of that. Internationalize the message, which is really the same strategic objective, except widening it out. Now, with us, we had a huge Irish diaspora. We're a nation, a historical nation of immigrants. So there's a huge diaspora in America, and we reached out to them to internationalize, and also there's Irish throughout the world. The third, if you like, leg of this is internal cohesion. And this goes back to the partnership, which I talk about in a minute. If you do not have, if you cannot bring people along with what you're doing in a peace process, then, we call it stretching the elastic. So you have to show leadership. But if you go beyond your base, if you go beyond the activists, if you go beyond the population in moving forward, then you have lost the power, because where does your power come from? And we always said, even in negotiations, it is not the negotiators, it doesn't matter how intelligent they are. It is the people who support them on the outside, who accept where they are going, which gives them the power. And so internal cohesion, and our biggest negotiation was actually with our base, with the nationalists within Ireland and the diaspora, to support us in our move forward out of conflict through a peace process into a political process. the last point, which I think is important and has been touched on, I think, by certainly Roberta and Noam for different reasons, but it is alliances or partnerships, as we said. And there are positive and negative alliances. So we had in our strategic objectives to avoid negative alliances, which could mean the British government getting with the Irish government and trying to bring them on board and leaving us behind, leaving the community behind, leaving the North behind, for an example, or taking some of the other political parties and giving them sort of partial power and things like that. So the positive alliances for us could be quite temporary. But if I could describe it very simply, you know, if your political power is this size, and for an issue, a single issue, for instance, like policing, which is a good example, we were able to bring the Irish government on board and bring the other nationalist parties on board, then our strength went from this size to this size for that period. And for that subject. And we were able to gain much more. I mean, to put it more simply, the more you have, the stronger you are. And therefore alliances become hugely important in terms of that. We also had international facilitators who came in, for instance, George Mitchell, when the negotiations were going bad, and indeed when the implementation process was hitting barriers, we then asked for assistance from outside in terms of that. I've talked too long, and forgive me, but if there's any questions, that's where sort of we are. I think the important message is that we must continue on. Even though we hit barriers, even though we become demoralized, the rightness, if you like, the righteousness of what you're going for, of what you want, of human rights, of unity, of purpose, of inclusion. And we read at the start of this, because we had been excluded for many, many years. We reached out to small groups, even opponents, not necessarily nationalists. There were loyalist groups, there were small groups within who were British orientated. And we said, if you want to get a resolution, bring them all into it, no matter how small they are, and give them a voice. So I apologize for speaking so long, but I mean, that's my, if you like, presentation. And if there's any questions, I will try and assist. Thank you.
Sí, muchísimas gracias, Jera Kelly.
Thank you very much, Jera Kelly. I think he's given some elements that are very important, as well as other colleagues with us in their own reflections. It is important to be emphatic about the role of the governments and this party system within the implementation, or for the implementation of these peace agreements, noticing that in Colombia, these substantial changes of the government facing this peace government, the current government was opposed to the possibilities of a negotiated result of this armed conflict. So there is an impact that we are now living in Colombia. And there is a phrase, if you wish, that will take us to keep on thinking about it, and it's the possibility to read these peace processes as an agreement, as a political path, or a mechanism to achieve social, political, and economical changes. At the end of the day, there is a clear intention for the ethnic peoples, especially starting from the building of the ethnic chapter of the agreement that was a window, a possibility to acquire new rights within this process, peace process. Under this perspective, I'd like you to deep a bit in the role of the international facilitators. Did this role to work in favor, to help to the implementation of these peace agreements with Northern Ireland? In Colombia, we're going through a similar process where rightly, we have the government against the party system. There are some material conclusions that are really stopping this implementation, affecting the ethnic chapter. How a methodological process could help us to explore the possibility coming from these international facilitators to basically help us within this process in Colombia.
Sorry, are you asking me a question, Armando?
La traducción, ¿quién la está haciendo?
Hello.
So do you heard the question, or you want us to repeat it?
Could you repeat it, please?
Okay.
¿Cuál sería la pregunta, Amanda?
La pregunta sería efectivamente.
Okay. So my question is with regards to the strategies. What can you tell us about the strategies and the role of the international facilitators during the Irish peace process?
Specifically, was the role of the international community and the
Okay.
facilitators that accompanied you in your process?
Okay, I think it's worth saying that governments generally resist because they look upon it as an internal matter. So they generally resist international intervention. However, because we had reached out, and the other thing is once the conflict ends, it also empowers people. So people who agree with your aim but cannot agree with the conflict, then are liberated to become part of it. So your strength almost automatically starts growing in that circumstance. And we were able then to reach into mainstream Irish America and get interest from there. And we eventually, because of that process, the British government, because the Americans, because there's a huge Irish American diaspora, for instance, Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton both took an interest in Ireland. One of the small things they did, well, it was huge, but it seemed small, was that they gave a passport, a travel visa for Gerry Adams, who was our leader, to be able to go to America, to talk to Irish Americans, to talk to the White House, to do that. So while there was resistance from the British government to allow others in because they thought it was their issue, they have relationships with other governments as well, and therefore, on a number of occasions, agreed to that. And in fact, there was a number of American envoys, special envoys, which were tasked to assist in the process of negotiations and implementation. Senator George Mitchell actually came and took over as a chair and a facilitator of the negotiations, as someone who was looked upon as a neutral figure, because of course part of our problem as Republicans, as Irish Republicans, Irish nationalists, was that we did not trust the British in what they were in what they said, and therefore the Irish government also was involved. So we had two governments involved, and with the American government, we ended up with three governments involved. And I don't want to exaggerate their part in it, except to say that they intervened on important issues. And so they weren't there on an ongoing basis. But for instance, if there was a disagreement between the British government and the Irish government over something, they may have taken a position there, and they may have done it quietly and spoke to both the British Prime Minister and the Taoiseach, or the leader in Dublin. So it was, and it took some time, of course, because the first ceasefire was in 1994, and it wasn't until '97, where we were able to bring in, if you like, international assistance in terms of the negotiations. In terms of implementation, for instance, now, when President Biden came in, and because there's now a long-standing relationship with Ireland, Trump excluded, President Trump excluded, but when President Biden came in, the first thing that he said was, in terms of Brexit, because the British pulled out of the European Union, was that they did not want Brexit in any way to do damage to the peace accord and the political accord in Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement. And they were very public and said this internationally, that was their position on that. And since, of course, the British government want to do, because they've now left the European Union, want a trade deal with America, then they have to listen to that advice. So that's sort of an example of that. It was, I don't want to say that this was an easy thing. There was a long process. Even building up to be able to do talks during the conflict, it was a long process. So this has been a long process, and we are 23 years into it now, and we are still having problems. But an example of when you build alliances, even though they may be for a short period of time or on a single issue or whatever, that those alliances can stay solid, and our access for such a small area of the world into the White House is actually fairly extraordinary, I would have to say.
Okay, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Jera Kelly, Rigoberta. Thank you very much. Thank you, Noam Chomsky, very much. So now we will continue with Juan Carlos Monges, representative of the High Peace Commissioning for Colombia. They have played an essential role from the dialogues, then discussing different parts of the accord, and then with the implementation. He is with the Ethnic Commission in the different spaces, in the territory and in the participation, and the IAMPE, special space of ethnic people, who does the follow to that chapter of the peace accord. I want to talk to Juan Carlos Monges, the representative. What's the assessment done by the office in Colombia, by the High Commissioning of the United Nations on Human Rights about the peace accord? What are the recommendations? And that's key. Right now, we are going through a very complex process with regards to the implementation of the peace accord. Juan Carlos, representative to the UN, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. I am so pleased to be here on behalf of the offer. I appreciate the Commission for this invitation. Professor Chomsky, Ramos, Horta, Jera Kelly. Thank you, all of you. Before responding, I will say that my intervention is gonna be less interesting than the others, because the former interventions were very nice, Mr. Ramos Horta, because I need to mention technical aspects. Before, I want to highlight some things that I've heard through these presentations that are very important to me. Is there a camera issue? I don't know. Yeah, we cannot see you. Sorry. I'm sorry. Let me see if you can see me. Yes, sir. We can see you now. Very good. Thank you. I think that the former talks, and I want to add a small drop. Rigoberta remembered to us something that is in the theories of the peace accord and peace processes. There is a difference between making peace the formal act, and building peace. That's a daily exercise. In many cases, in Colombia, Guatemala, and I imagine North Ireland also, there's an opposition. There's always be an opposition. And I want to say some things that are important with that regards. Going back to the experience of our dear Guatemala, it's hard to measure the progress. And in some cases, it has been tried to use percentages, percentiles, but here we're talking about a peace process, not a reality that's going to change one day to the other. That's why we need to be very serious with the indicators of advances, backlash, challenges. And it is also important to be very careful to repeat what wasn't working, because that will make us forget what is really working. Deep changes, structural changes, to overcome the inequalities and historical human rights challenges that somehow allowed to continue with the conflict for decades. And those changes are not going to come one day to the other if all the social forces of that society don't participate. Well, no, not the society, the country, the nation. I want to add also that my talk is going to be very technical, including in the reports of the High Commissioning. I want to add that Colombia office is in the country thanks to an agreement between Colombia and the United Nations. One of the main functions is to follow up, to analyze, and to observe the human rights in the country. After the final signature of this accord in 2016, the office received new functions. That's to include in the yearly reports and a special chapter about the implementation of the rights in terms of human rights. The office does a quantitative, qualitative analysis of the advances and challenges of the implementation, among other topics, of the ethnic chapter of the Peace Accord to the light of the international standards. I'm going to link my presentation to the topics that have a relation with the indigenous people, Afro-descendant people in the chapter. Just as a parenthesis, the office is not doing the analysis from Bogota, focusing on recommendations formulated from here, from the office. According to our mandate, we provide technical assistance to the technical entities and the civil society managers in the people's and ethnic organizations. We have a broad national deployment that allowed us to work with the representatives of the indigenous people, the Afro-descendant communities, other communities, support them in their strategies to request for their rights. Same with the state entities. Our access is to cooperate so that decisions and the policies are according to the international norms and standards for indigenous people and Afro-descendants. Closing my parentheses and going back to my point. Our main follow-up instrument is the year report of the High Commissioning, presented every year to the Human Rights Council at Geneva. The High Commissioner has identified year after year the challenges to duly comply the international standards. With regards to the ethnic chapter of the Peace Accord, it is very important because in that chapter are developed broadly rights recognized by the international entities, and our yearly report monitor that situation, propose recommendations to the Colombian state to strengthen the response, to have the right response. So in general terms, the High Commissioner recommended to continue implementing every point of the peace comprehensive way with regards to what was decided to the ethnical and gender and victim participation focus, so they can participate to the right, the justice, the reparation, and the guarantee of the non-repetition. Something that was presented in the last report presented during this year, she identified the impact that different expressions of violence are being seen, the lack of access to justice, and obstacles to enjoy their territory and their autonomy. High Commissioner and the office believe that an important and essential tool to support these adverse conditions is with the reinforcement of the chapter of the final accord. To include, I would like to highlight other challenges and other recommendations identified by the High Commissioner through these years. Let me start by the challenges. I'm just going to mention some, and then the recommendations, in order to give you the perspective of our advances and the obstacles that we still have for the proper implementation of the accord. The first challenge I want to highlight is the one linked to the need to implement in those areas far away and the protection of the collective territories of the communities, and to develop a good environment for the authorities and Afro-descendant. There is a mic open. I'm sorry, there is an intervention. Someone open the mic. Javier Betancourt, please. Javier, can you close the mic of Javier Betancourt? Javier, your mic is on. Thank you. I apologize for that interruption. You can continue, Representative. The next challenge that has been presented by the office are those linked to the collective measurements that guarantee the protection of the indigenous people and the Afro-descendant with the cultural perspective that will respond to their ancestral practices. The High Commissioner also identified challenges to include the ethnic focus and an agreement with ethnic authorities to implement programs linked to the peace accord in different departments of the country. And that means to design and to execute the national comprehensive plan to replace the illicit crops. The next challenge has to do, unfortunately, with the illicit economic activities of criminal and violent groups that are negatively affecting the traditional use of the territory of the different communities. High Commissioner and the office is not just focused on this diagnosis, the difficulties, obstacles, and challenges the country has in order to implement properly the accord. But the most important part here, and I believe that's the key of the former talks, accord can be nice, ugly, pretty, short, long. The key is in the implementation. And that recommendation normally trend to find specific solutions to advance. Among the recommendations proposed by the High Commissioner in the last years, first of all will be to encourage the state to strengthen a system where the public officials will work actively in the rural areas to strengthen their understanding of the challenges in the territories. And that way, they can apply a different focus, the ethnic focus specifically. So without having any global solution to all the parties, without taking into account the cultural differences, It's going to be very hard if they don't take that. Also, the increase in the public expense in those areas where there were the children from the old FARC guerrilla, to guarantee them the right to the education, the social support, and the development, applying the principle of the gender focus and superior interest in those areas where they were abducted, and to strengthen the participation and the human rights plan to attend the regional needs and to include the ethnic and gender focus, and also requested that the assessment process of the different advances will be based on human rights international standards. The last recommendation I would like to mention here is the High Commissioner has warned or encouraged to apply measures that will allow to overcome the challenges to guarantee the right to the consultation and previous and free agreement for the indigenous people and Afro-descendants. I'm going to stop here to give the opportunity to the next presentation. So thank you very much. Thank you, Representative Juan Carlos Monge, very much. So I think that to conclude with this panel, I want to ask to Jera Kelly and to Rigoberta Mench, because Professor Juan Chomsky is needed to attend other commitment, but he is going to be waiting for the conclusions. From the Ethnic Commission for the Peace and the Territorial Rights Defense, we are exploring the option to build a tissue, to build a network of support, so we can have an international incidence, and that way we can support the implementation of that ethnic chapter of the Peace Accord. I want to ask to Jera Kelly and Rigoberta Mench if you are available and willing to support this talk to be international spokespersons of the implementation of this ethnic chapter of this peace accord. Rigoberta, the floor is yours. You have your mic is closed. No. Well, thank you very much. The initiative is a very important one. Sometimes we stay just assessing, evaluating our own processes, and we forgot to take a look to the great experience and expertise that we can transfer to new processes, to the new generations, and not necessarily because maybe the process haven't gone as we desired. But the most important that we can do is to transfer the experience. We have a whole sea of experience here in Guatemala, an experience in the definition, in the methodology, pedagogy, because we have been trying to defend the peace accord. For us, no one is going to do it for us. We're going to do it. There is a set of leadership here that can exchange their experiences in a more systematic way. I think that the best condition for these alliances or partnership, because we have insisted that we will obtain good results thanks to the collaboration, thanks to the cooperation, thanks to this partnership, thanks to a common agenda not just for the region, because we are looking to a global crisis and we are being affected by migration right now. The youth without job, youth trying to find better life conditions. So the global enthusiasm is very important. So I want to congratulate you for this initiative. I'm going to share it here with all the different activists and actors, people who have succeeded thanks to being persistent and coherent with their ideas and their fight. So I think that, yes, we need to take this beyond. Don't exclude observing what the North American policy from Biden is offering, and that was addressed by Noam Chomsky. And there is another mic. Humberto Molina, can you close your mic, please? Sorry, another open mic. As I was saying, always we need to take into account the other regions, and we need to add that we are mad against corruption that dehumanizes the situation of the whole population. So I agree. Yes, my answer is yes. Count on me. I agree. Yes. So we will provide information. I need more information, because without that information, I'm going to abstain. Far from helping, I'm gonna be making things more complicated. And in that case, without information, I rather observe without intervening. So again, I am requesting for the information, because that's very important. I am your partner. You can count on me. And also, it's not just to put the cherry of the cake. No. We need funds to fund the indigenous people, ethnic peoples. They need to execute their own program, their own projects. That's what we are doing here. And thank you very much. Thank you for accepting our invitation to be part of this tissue of international partners. Same question to Mr. Jera Kelly.
Thank you, and I'm glad that Rigoberta came in front of me, because she put it much more eloquently than I could. I think there was a thing which she mentioned, which we used to say. A part of my job during a lot of the negotiations and since has been communication with our base. And you could be sitting with small numbers in the room, or you could be sitting with big numbers in the room. But one of the things which we had the habit of saying is that the answers are in this room. And I think Rigoberta mentioned that, that the experience is in the room, that what is right for your circumstance, and what you need is help in that. It's not that you need other people to tell you what it is, you know what it is, but it's to ask for assistance around that. We have an international department, and I would ask them to, and we will send that contact, to send whatever information you can in terms of that. You certainly have our solidarity, and anything that we can help. This is about peace with justice. Even though I have been a combatant, I have spent my life, my adult life, looking for peace with justice in Ireland, and I certainly support that in any other country which sees oppression or corruption or bad government. My vote is with the people, with those who are suffering, and that the change needs to come. So the easy answer to what you're asking is yes. But as Rigoberta says, can you send us more information? And let me thank you for the invite here, because it has been an education for me also, absolutely.
Okay, muchísimas gracias. Ya tenemos
thank you very much. So now we have some peers from a brother and a peer from North Ireland and from Guatemala, who are going to be building this tissue of spokespersons of this ethnic chapter of our peace accord. And that's very important to decentrate this peace accord. So thank you very much. I give the floor to Diana, so she can continue moderating and then move to the conclusions, the recommendations, and the including act of this meeting. Thank you very much for this international tissue and the tissue of the different people, the tissue of the resistance, and to all of us who are living through this experience in Colombia. Thanks for the international experiences. Greetings to all the cyber attendees who are present in this call. I've been receiving different messages from different people from all ages, children, young people, from the rural area and the cities. Thank you very much for being part of this diverse bag that we are building. Next, I give the floor to Joanna Amaya Pance, who will present the final recommendations. The floor is yours. Thank you, Diana. Thank you very much to all the organizations that invited to this initiative. As Panche, I have my indigenous ancestors. I greet the communities that are present here, and I am honored to collect the conclusions of this discussion. The discussion will continue. These are just the preliminary conclusions, and we need to continue investigating deeply. The speech of all the panel participants is common, that they are invitation the internal cohesion of the communities. And I think that there are different communities present here, and that's a good indication of the internal cohesion that we can have to manage different supports. And I think the internal cohesion, as it was explained before by Rigoberta Mench and Mr. Kelly, it's needed to manage the supports in the international community with international actors. The positive interventions, as Mr. Kelly mentioned, oriented to protect the civilians, oriented to protect the human rights. I wrote recently a policy brief for the European Union, and I want to share here some of the slides when I show here how those leaders killed by the social sector between 2016 and 2020 are the indigenous leaders, the last line, 20% of the total population killed within the social leaders that have been assassinated. And this is important for the recommendations to the national government, to the international community, and is the protection of the civilians. The internal cohesion needs to be oriented to call the attention, not just of the government, but the international community to protect the physical, human protection of these indigenous communities and Afro-descendant people in Colombia. That's one of the main conclusions of this document, and we need to do an important call for this. When do some balances, there are some positive aspects, but we need to call the attention to the protection of the life of the civilians, mainly the indigenous people, because 20% of them have been killed. And the indigenous in general are just 4% of the total population. So that's a very serious figure. Mr. Kelly also mentioned the local government resistance to the international participation. For the case of Colombia, there is a contradiction between the image projected to the international community versus the internal practices. And that type of disagreement needs to be aligned. And then the participation of the different cooperation agencies' role will be to have a surveillance of the resources, not just to be donors, but to monitor those resources that have been donated, how they are reflected and invested in the development and in the policies. And that's a challenge for the international actors. So also, as it has been said by the panelists, every day we are building the peace accord. 25 years after, and more than 20 in North Island and in Guatemala, they continue protecting this peace accord. And as Rigoberta Mench mentioned, that goes generation after generation to protect those accords. During the transformation or during building that legacy, Mr. Kelly mentioned how to build that legacy. The role of the international communities is essential. Different studies in the literature have shown that the international actors, for example, in the case of Colombia, have been partners of the communities and have been protecting them. So we need to continue and reinforce those partnerships with strategic actors like the European Union, who have established an agenda prioritizing human rights, and not one guided to the mitigation or elimination of illicit crops, as the North American government have done. It's important the call made by Ms. Rigoberta Mench to the radical and structural transformation in the justice system against impunity. Yes, in a peace accord, we cannot guarantee absolute punitive justice. It's a transitional justice, but require the surveillance from the international actors, how that's really being implemented in the structure of the force services. 25 years job in Guatemala, and there is a lesson there. In every place, including in Ireland and Guatemala, there is a resistance against the accord, even one generation after, 25 years after. And that legal transformation of the justice system and the armed forces is essential to guarantee that transformation in the long term. According to the clear recommendations provided by Mr. Monges, and also the other presentations of the panelists, the international realities are different. Each country has its own reality. But we need to be very, very specific with territorial peace. The binational reality changes in a country like Colombia. And the indigenous community in Colombia reality is very specific to each community. Every action guided to guarantee the access to the land in the land reform, that bill needs to include the ethnic chapter, the ethnic brand, the collective right of to the land. And the idea is not to fragment the community, but needs to be very clear about the access to the land restitution. The political participation is essential, taking into account the traditional activities and empower the local emerging leaders from the new young people, the new generations, and also the disarmament, demobilization, and the reintegration of the ex-combatants shall integrate the participation of the ethnic community and their own healing rituals whenever they are members of ethnic communities. Same as it was mentioned before by Professor Chomsky, the substitution of illicit crops is essential for the accord implementation. I say in general, what the ancestrals call the knowledge that the ancestral communities, the traditional plants and the natural cycles of land, for them is very important. So we can integrate these ancestral and communities. With regards to the protection of victims and civilians, it's going to be very important to include this perspective of the symbolic repair, including the traditions of these ethnic people with regards to the relationship with the territory. I can continue deeply, but here, what is most important of all is to protect the civilians and mainly the indigenous communities. With regards to the implementation verification, again, the participation of the indigenous people and Afro-descendant people is going to be important, because after that internal cohesion will be more alliances with international actors that we will really verify the coherence between the speech from the international cooperation to protect the human rights with the public policies, the development plan, and the real actions. During analysis of different budgets, we were able to find that something that was allocated to peace was deviated to a parade, a carnival, other affairs that have nothing to do with the peace accord implementation. The call to the mediation of the different international institutions, I am working here with mediation, that's to monitor and to present this kind of schizophrenia between the speech and the real practice. Because we need to guarantee that the public policies are really aligned to the peace accord as a state policy. So thank you very much for allowing me to participate. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these recommendations. Very important from Joanna. For all of us, we have on hashtag for the ones who are listening from different parts of the world. We want to thank the communication team that we've been working with, COMPA, PCL, Ethnic Peoples for Peace, Addison Unique, that are having lots of people for us to be seen and to be listened to. That it is for this international women would be used for the defense of the human rights. Now I move to the authorities so they can give us their analysis and recommendations on this topic. So we start with Mayor Armando. He's not. So let's go to Mayor Carlos Rosero.
Quisiéramos agradecer
We would like to thank the presentations of each one for us have been very important. Of the things that I've heard, I have concluded 4 topics. The first one is that the whole topic of peace and peace building at least is a halfway sort of marathon. We've listened that we don't have the right to give up. We have to insist, to persevere, and to work every day to keep the path. Second thing that I have concluded, and I am grateful for that, is the possibility, big possibility, to learn from others, to exchange with others. This is a path in which we're not alone. Many other peoples have gone through the same situations, and the big possibility to enrich us through the experiences from others in their own walk, ready as they are to contribute so that everybody's path will be easier. Thirdly, I've listened that we have the huge responsibility to set us, to organize us in the best possible way in all matters, that the war is gone, so peace will help us to achieve the results. This is the work that we have to do daily. And with these organizations, it's quite difficult to get or to go further. But I can talk about something that Rigoberta said, and it's about telling the truth. Somebody has to just shake himself at all times so we cannot lie, so that things are clear and are on the table, so that from there we can have the possibility to redo all the paths needed for the recovery of their autonomy, freedom, and exercising in a comprehensive way all the rights. This is what I've learned from these talks. Thank you all for being there, for your experiences, and for all these years of struggle, because the huge capacity of resistance that you have shown, and for sharing that with us, the learnings that you have, that will give us the provisions to walk straight forward. This meeting has been very important. We've learned, I know, well, we know that it's not that easy. We have to obtain the best from us. And we have people helping us worldwide, you know, ready to collaborate from their hearts. We will be here. From here, we have the possibilities to contribute to any situation important for all of us. Thank you for your presence, your talks, and your learnings.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Major Carlos Rosero. Next,
Plaza,
Major Asdrúbal Plaza.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. It is important to say that, first of all, I have to thank all panelists' participations, leaving lots of learnings and reflections, and a huge amount of task to develop in this post-agreement. I would like to start by saying that one of the things that I highlight the most is the need to face the territorial realities. Those are not easy, starting that our own ethnic peoples especially have a lot of constraints in these territories, and to prove that if what the government says is going to be materialized in this ethnic chapter, or otherwise, as somebody said, are some disagreements between the theory and the practice. The discourse, official discourse might say one thing, but the realities might be different. It is important to reflect upon the peace is not achieved signing an agreement. The signing of the agreement is the facilitator as an instrument to build of this peace process. That's why it is a process. And the call made is that from this post-agreement period is when we start really the defense of peace and of the process, the confirmation of the process. On the other hand, there is something else that I'd like to highlight, and it's that we have to give more power at linking dynamics of all the process of ethnic peoples. They have had constraints in that area, and as I said at the beginning of my talk, the government talks about 80% of compliance of the ethnic chapter, like if everything was done. But for ethnic peoples, would only be 10%, so the difference is quite huge. And we have to find the communicator or the link between these differences as saw by the ethnic peoples and the realities as perceived by the government. But somehow they are very much tied to the people, and whoever summarized these, we were told that some things is or are the international discourses and the international image managed by peace, and the other things are the realities in Colombia. One small word will define these based upon what had happened with these national demonstrations. While we know internally that the public forces have committed a lot of violations of human rights, the national government headed by the president says that these forces are a worldwide example of the application of human rights. This is not the case, and it shows us how is the government is living in a different galaxy, but not living in Colombia. Well, they live in Colombia, as said by Mr. President. Now, we're left with a huge task, and is that how to work within the strengthening of the GEP. GEP is threatened, but all in Colombia we have clarity that what they're trying to find or to search is impunity of all the structures that are responsible of these tragedies and pain in Colombia for more than 60 years. So it is important that the GEP and from the international instances will help us to give it power, not to disinstitutionalize it as they want to do it. Transitional justice is facing another challenge requiring our own forces, and that these agents responsible of the whole false positives and all things that have happened here, they are selective massacres, systematic massacres against our social leaders and especially against our indigenous peoples. How do you give justice to these? Because they really love for it. The Supreme Court says that we are enacting some detention that is actually accused of something, but he goes to the prosecution office, which is or might be in his or her pocket, and he goes free. So it is about the international instances to take on board this kind of joke that the justice is being treated as. The procurator is filing 12,000 investigations on corruption. This is alarming. So where are we, Colombians? Will be taking the first place? What problem? They keep saying that this is the best government of the world. Dear friends, thank you very much. This has been a very important moment for reflection, but the challenges are still there. Thank you. Thank you, Manolo Pua. The company. Now we have Joanna Millán. Thank you. Here again, taking again all the important issues as discussed in this talk. I believe and I collect some of the aspects related to the work from the indigenous and Afro women. As said, this is a long-term process. Before the signing of this agreement, we were working and we continue doing so. We have to mention this here because, as we said, there are some very huge impacts upon the ethnic communities and populations, and women have had a greater impact in their own rights and lives in the territories and in the communities, and from there we call, because this talk is not the only of these waving that we have had to strengthen the agreements and the joint work between communities, ethnic communities, and between these international alliances allowing to follow up the interpretation of the agreement. As some of our colleagues, like Rigoberta said, we have to build information, and that's what we are trying to back. What is the agreement implementation? What is that the government is saying, and what is that ethnic communities are living in different sectors? Because whoever is not there, not suffering these complex situations, whoever is not living these situations as a result of the whole history, classist, discriminatory, and racist history, and with all impacts of the pandemic, cannot show realities. And this is what we are betting upon, to build this truth from the territorial truth, but showing it in a technical way, so that the state can also see what are the results shown. Is not about controversy of the truth, but working together. Let's have a look. And let's work in line together with the organization that say what is the way that this implementation can take place within the territories, with the peoples and organizations suffering from this. It is important to thank the people with us here, telling that we will work with these partners for the implementation of the peace agreement from the gender focus. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for these very important words from the territory. Special greetings to the ones who are still with us from the international community, and with other ethnic organizations and the comments. We invite you to use the hashtag. And next we will sing the song, The Pain of Our Fair Boris, sung by our friend Ana Milinaria. Good afternoon, or days, good day to you. Thanking you for this space, for this invitation. Thank you for this special tissue that we are building. I will sing The Pain of Our Bear Forest, and this is a song composed by the Grupo Bahía. So with all my love and with all my feelings, this is what it is. Are you listening?
El dolor de mis ancestros siento yo.
The pain of my bare borders, I feel it. The pain of my forebears, I feel. I imagine how would it be this happy routine? how would be this agony type of life? Justice and harmony. Justice and harmony. The pain of my forefathers, of the ancestors I feel. To cry, to help, to heal, sorry, to cry but to give. To cry, to heal, to cry but to pardon. The pain of the kids I feel. The pain of these youngsters I feel. The lost lives. The dreams without the owner. I ask myself, if we respect a life, how would it be? It would be a harmony routine. Harmony and happiness. The pain of the youngsters I feel. To heal, to fight, and to forgive. To fight, to heal.
El dolor de esos muchachos siento yo.
No more, no one more. No more. Not even one more.
Siento yo. El dolor de mis ancestros siento yo. Siento yo. Siento yo. Siento yo.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Very beautiful song and important with a good message.
El sentimiento de la mujer. Gracias. Y ahora,
Thank you.
A continuación, pasamos.
Next, we'll move to Majoress Gerry from the Big House people contributing as well. Special greetings, fraternity, greetings to our every effort has been important to each one of you not being in the scene, but vital, I want to remind you of a word from Black peoples. I don't know whether you know it, but it has a sense. Ubuntu is the name of it, and I believe that Ubuntu of this meeting calling by Canada, London, and many other places, very far away places, is the fruit of what has been taught by Ubuntu. I want to thank the huge spirit of the sisters that put together the flower stand and everybody understanding that there is a challenge left, as Anil said, to remind us that Armando, even if it's not or was not physically with us, he was spiritually present. And to each one, Sister Celia, special greetings to all. And we have a challenge in front of us. And this network that we've dreamt for many days and nights, this network of celebrities accompanying us so we can just have this peace implementation, especially for the ethnic chapter. For all of you, goodbye. Thank you. May you rest these words. And again, this international tissue has been from ethnic authorities, indigenous authorities, and from all communication processes, from organizations, from ONIC, AIC, COMPA, CCN, and ethnic peoples for peace. Thank you very much for these experiences from the territories, and also to our own spiritual authorities guiding this spiritual path, and to our own present authorities in this virtual scenario and other authorities in the different territories. This is a dialogue that I can't translate. It's not Spanish. Thanking all the communication team and to our social networks, seeing us and helping us this moment. Thank you. Special greetings and spiritual thanks, cultural thanks of brotherhood to all. Thank you.
Thank you. Muchas gracias a todos. Thanks, Gerry.
Thank you, muchas gracias.
Thanks, Rigoberta. Thank you, Joanna.